Winter went by quickly, days marked off the calendar in a flash as the Sioux City Strangler worked and drove to visit Maria almost every weekend. He often had to drive through the night on Sunday to make it to wherever his morning meeting was the next day, but he didn't mind. He was always flying high after a weekend with Maria. His travel schedule also meant that the Sioux City Strangler was able to keep up his lie about living out of a motel nearby, having not yet settled into a home of his own. After a few months of thinking about how to tell Maria the truth, though, he came up with a different strategy. At the end of one of their weekends, the Sioux City Strangler sat Maria down at her own dining table and told her he had some big news. In the next few weeks, he was going to be taking a job with the new regional office at his company in Sioux City. He said there was a little more responsibility and a pay raise. He also told Maria that he'd still be able to visit all the time since he traveled so much anyway. He was hardly ever in town anyway, right? Maria, to her credit, was happy that he was doing well in his career. She was still working at Harvest House and was growing increasingly frustrated with her uneventful daily routine. This was likely one reason she said yes when the Sioux City Strangler asked for her hand in marriage less than 6 months after they met. Maria D'Angelo and the Sioux City Strangler were married in the spring of 1974. Their traditional Catholic ceremony, which was important to Maria and her relatives, was long and somewhat tedious, but the Sioux City Strangler wore a smile throughout. Maria's family was kind, warm, and welcoming to the man she was marrying. Though they hadn't spent much time with him before the wedding, they were convinced that he was a good man worth marrying based on what Maria had told them. The fact that Maria had been unlucky in love also made them more comfortable with her settling down with a solid, stable man with a good job. The Sioux City Strangler agonized over whether he should invite his mother to the wedding. In the end, he decided it was best not to, though he told Maria his mother had declined the invitation. While some part of him wanted her there, he was worried she might say something rude to Maria or put him down in a way that would make him look like a loser in front of her family. He would call her and tell her once it was official. On the groom's side, only John Pruitt was in attendance, serving as the Sioux City Strangler's best man. The night before the wedding, the pair went out and drank their body weight in beer, sharing high school football stories and even talking about the war. By the end of the night, the Sioux City Strangler felt that he did, in fact, have a friend in his corner. This is the story of the Sioux City Strangler, a man who terrorized the great state of Iowa for nearly 10 years before making his way to California for a little fun in the sun and a fresh crop of citizens to terrorize. I'm your host, Mary Buckley, and you're listening to Sioux City Strangler, the podcast. It didn't come as a surprise when the Sioux City Strangler learned that the 3 bodies he left in the field by the Lighthouse Inn were discovered not too long after the wedding. It was all over the news, even in Sioux City, where he and Maria now shared an apartment. He'd been waiting for the story to break since the weather warmed up. He had thought about moving the bodies many times in the months between leaving them in that field and the spring thaw. He envisioned lifting the 3 stiff women and piling them into his Pontiac, 2 in the trunk and 1 in the back seat under a tarp or packing blanket. He could bury them somewhere remote and they might never be found. When he tried to put his plan in motion, though, it became clear that the timing would be too difficult to figure out. Digging into frozen ground would take too long with 3 bodies to bury. If he waited until the thaw, he'd risk being spotted by somebody working in the field. There were other risks, too, like being pulled over by an overzealous cop with a pile of decaying bodies in the back of your car. So the Sioux City Strangler decided there was nothing to do except watch the news, check the paper, and wait. He knew they'd find the bodies, but he couldn't think of a single way the authorities could connect them to him. It was a Friday night when the news broke, and it just so happened that the Sioux City Strangler was at home instead of traveling on business. Maria was in the kitchen roasting a chicken and preparing a simple salad of corn, green beans, and carrots, a basic meal that they would eat often in the coming years. As Maria came into the room to let her husband know that dinner was ready, she saw a reporter standing in front of the Lighthouse Inn. She immediately recognized it. "Hey, we've been there," she said. "What's going on?" The Sioux City Strangler hadn't heard her come into the room in her bare feet. He was so engrossed in the news on the screen that he might not have heard her if she'd been wearing ice skates. "Huh?" he said. "What did you say?" Maria looked at the screen and watched for a moment. "I was just saying that we've been there, the Lighthouse Inn." "Oh, yeah," he said, standing up to turn off the TV. "Is dinner ready? It smells amazing. I'm as hungry as a horse." "You're always hungry as a horse." "Well, do we have any hay? Oats? Apples?" "Just chicken and a little salad," she said. The Sioux City Strangler pretended to be disappointed. "It will have to do." In the kitchen, Maria poured the Sioux City Strangler a beer and made a plate for him. As she returned to the table with her food and beer, carrying the salt and pepper shakers in the crook of her left arm, she asked him what that news story had been about anyway. "Oh, the thing at the lighthouse?" he asked. "Yeah, what happened?" "I'm not totally sure, but I think they found a body in the parking lot or something." "Oh no, that's awful. Was it a robbery or something? It wouldn't be on the news if the manager had a heart attack on the way to his car." "I'm not really sure. All I really got out of it was body and Lighthouse Inn. I'm sure it'll be in the paper." Of course, the Sioux City Strangler knew all the gruesome details. They'd found 3 bodies, not 1, and they weren't in the parking lot. They just set the cameras up there because it looked better than standing in front of a big field full of nothingness. "Maria," he said, trying to get her to look up from the piece of chicken she was cutting into small bites. "Yes," she said before putting the tiny bite of chicken speared on the end of her fork into her mouth. "I love you," he said, putting on a gentle, sincere smile. "This is a wonderful dinner." "I love you too, and thank you. It's easy, but it gets the job done." "Oh, it's more than that. Just because something isn't difficult doesn't mean it's not special." Maria just smiled, delighted by his kind, thoughtful words. He had a way of making her feel special just for being her. The pair ate slowly, talking about the neighbors they were starting to get to know and daydreaming about the house they wanted to start saving for. The Sioux City Strangler didn't care about the house so much. At least, not what it looked like or what was inside. Maria could pick all of that, and she had better taste than him anyway, he'd said. He just wanted a dog and hopefully a place with a yard. They didn't talk about kids that night, but in the past, they'd always come to the same conclusion. They were still young and had plenty of time to build a life together first. "Hey," he said, "let's plan for a big day on Sunday, huh? We'll go get breakfast in town and go shopping and go to a movie. I'll be heading out the next morning for the week, you know? Let's make it a fun day." "Okay, it's a date." "Good," he thought, taking a big swig of his beer, finishing the glass. That'll keep her from seeing the Sunday paper for sure. We'll be right back after this message.
By the time you get home, it's 5:45. Now you've got to put food on the table, help your kids finish their homework, and tackle bath time. Once the little ones are asleep, you'll be too exhausted to even turn on the TV. Feast Fresh Forever is here to help with a huge selection of ready-to-make meals available in individual portions or family packs. Delivered twice a week to your door, Feast Fresh Forever is the perfect solution for busy professionals and parents that want delicious dinners without all the fuss. We've even got a kids menu packed full of classics like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and mac and cheese. Sign up today with promo code SCS2. That's the letters SCS and the number 2 to get a $50 credit applied to your first order. Offer not available in California, North Carolina, or Florida.
After a big breakfast of Belgian waffles, bacon, and nearly 2 pots of coffee at Murray's Diner, the Sioux City Strangler and Maria went shopping. For him, they picked out a brand new pair of brown brogues to wear on his upcoming business trip. Maria ended up buying a green and white daisy print dress, perfect for summer. The couple decided to see the 3 p.m. showing of Chinatown. They loaded up on popcorn and managed to score 2 seats right in the middle of the theater, though it was already crowded with other excited cinephiles. They both loved the movie, though Maria wished the ending had been a little happier. The Sioux City Strangler resisted the urge to say, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown," for the rest of the night. That evening, the Sioux City Strangler packed his clothes for a 5-day trip. As usual, he packed a combination of suits and dress apparel for work and more casual clothes for his other outings. He only had a few meetings each day, so he'd have plenty of downtime. As he zipped up his suitcase, Maria called out to let him know that the leftovers she'd pulled from the refrigerator were warm and ready. He answered back, taking a moment to look at his luggage and go over his mental checklist. He was a pro on the road by now, so it wasn't likely he'd forgotten anything. Besides, he could buy a shirt or some socks if he needed them. He headed toward the kitchen for dinner, but doubled back to the bedroom when an idea hit him. Trying to be quiet, he dug through a dresser drawer to locate a pair of black leather driving gloves. He tucked them into the bottom of his suitcase beneath his socks and underwear. He carried the suitcase to the front door and put it by the coat rack. He was always in a hurry to get on the road in the mornings. The Sioux City Strangler helped himself to the leftovers, piling a sizable helping of pasta with tomato sauce and mixed vegetables onto his plate. He cracked a beer and sat down across from Maria, who already had her plate. They were never very formal when it came to leftovers. The pair talked a little bit about the movie, though they'd shared most of their opinions on the way home from the theater. The Sioux City Strangler laid out his route for the trip, telling her about a few of the doctors he'd met more than once while doing his rounds. Maria had plans for lunch with one of the neighbors the next day, though she wasn't sure where they were going yet. In bed, he and Maria listened to the oldies station on the portable radio on his night table. Maria, as she often did, fell asleep with her head on his chest while he smoked a cigarette. After a few more tunes, the Sioux City Strangler reached over and quieted the radio before pulling the chain on the lamp and falling asleep for the night. When the Sioux City Strangler woke up, he could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen. As usual, Maria was already up in her pajamas and robe and slippers, making a pot and putting out the cream and sugar. There was no big breakfast this morning. Maria knew he didn't like to start long workdays with anything too heavy, despite his healthy appetite. A few scrambled eggs and toast, maybe with a piece of bacon if he was feeling famished, was all he wanted when he was going to be behind the wheel of his machine all morning. After breakfast, the Sioux City Strangler offered to help with the dishes, though Maria almost never let him. She waved him away, giving him a hug and a kiss, telling him to get on the road. It was almost 8, and he had a good drive before his first meeting of the day. Maria had stopped watching him drive away and blowing him a kiss from the sidewalk. It was sweet at first, but it only served to make her sad the more times she did it. Instead, she treated her husband's trips like he was just going off to work for the day, not for a week. He didn't notice the change, and she was happy she didn't have to explain. In the car, the Sioux City Strangler lit a cigarette and turned on the radio. He could still get the stations in town for a while, so he turned up the radio and enjoyed a little rock and roll. He was in a good mood, and he felt right at home behind the wheel of his Pontiac. It was 8:05 in the morning, and the Sioux City Strangler was on his way to Des Moines for an 11:30 meeting. Even with a little traffic going against him, he figured he'd make it by 11, maybe 11:15 at the latest. He lit another cigarette as Taken Care of Business by Bachman Turner Overdrive played on the radio. He reached for the volume knob and cranked it. The drive was uneventful, and he only made one stop to fill up his Pontiac. The sun was high and bright in the sky, and after parking, the Sioux City Strangler leaned against the passenger door of his car in his shirt sleeves. The street was quiet, and few people passed. One older couple in garb that looked pulled straight out of a 1940s period piece, perhaps a bit more wrinkled and worn, went into the office together. A young woman in dungarees and a white dress shirt that looked like a man's walked by pushing a baby in a yellow stroller. The Sioux City Strangler smiled and waved to her, but she ignored him, keeping both hands planted firmly on the stroller's handles, perhaps picking up her pace just a little as she went by. The waiting room was full of the usual waiting room furniture. There was a floor that was easy to clean and lots of furniture that was brown and orange and cream. It was easy to clean too. The only thing that stood out was a large oil painting of a man that must be the good Dr. Meacham, decked out in military dress, multiple medals pinned to his chest. The ornate gold leaf frame looked out of place in such a simple drab office. As usual, he waited a good 15 minutes past his appointment time to see the doctor. All part of the job, he thought. These doctors love to make people wait. Hell, even the old guy in the 40s getup who couldn't stop coughing into his handkerchief had to wait. A fresh-faced blonde receptionist, probably barely out of high school, flashed her ultra-white teeth at the Sioux City Strangler in some sort of attempt at a smile. She didn't keep her mouth open long enough for it to look like anything but a grimace, though. He returned her enthusiasm, though she'd already turned away, holding the door open between the waiting room and the hallway that fed into the exam rooms. Dr. Meacham's door was at the end of the hallway and clearly marked, which was good because the receptionist didn't bother to tell him where to go. As he walked by, he saw the old man from the waiting room sitting shirtless on an exam table, still hacking, coughing something up into a pink crinoline handkerchief that must have come from his wife's purse. The Sioux City Strangler knocked, following the instructions of the large "Please knock before entering" plaque glued to the doctor's office door. He knocked hard, like a man with war medals might knock. Dr. Meacham's office was in the running for the tidiest doctor's office he'd ever seen. If there was a medal for it, Meacham would have had that one too. Most docs had piles of papers or a half-eaten sandwich on the desk or something. Not Meacham. You'd be hard-pressed to figure out what he did in that office if you didn't come in through the front door. The meeting was fine, just like all the rest. The Sioux City Strangler turned on the charm, commenting on the great oil painting in the reception area. "Wow, yeah, now that was a real man's war," he said at one point. The old bastards loved to hear that shit, like their war was the only just war, their generation of soldiers the only one with real grit and determination. Normally, he wouldn't mention his own time in the service, aiming to keep any information about who he really was close to the vest. But he knew that John Pruitt used to call on Doc Meacham before he got his big promotion, becoming the head honcho all the guys on the road reported to back at the home office. He thought maybe Pruitt had called to let him know about the change, vouching for him, telling Meacham that he was in the war too. So he said he was in Nam, but the doc didn't ask questions. The old guys with the medals and the public adulation never asked questions. Nope, they just nodded to show the most basic amount of respect for another service member, as if to say, "You tried, son. At least you tried." When he left the office, the old man was still waiting in the exam room, still shirtless, still coughing. Of course he was still there. The doc had been in a meeting with him after all. We'll be right back after this message.
The open road is calling your name, but out-of-control gas prices aren't doing you any favors. Gas Saver fuel additives can keep your car running smoothly and save you big bucks as you rack up the miles. Designed with a proprietary formula the competition just can't crack, Gas Saver unleaded, high-performance, and diesel fuel additives are in a league of their own. Show the road no mercy and burn rubber by putting gas-saver fuel additives in your car or truck today.
It was just after 12:45 when the Sioux City Strangler pulled into the parking lot of the Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant. He looked at the Colonel's head, large and in charge, on the sign out front. He thought of Doc Meacham and the oil painting in his office as he stubbed out his cigarette against the brick facade. He didn't have another appointment until 3 p.m., so he lingered in the restaurant, drinking cups of Coke and smoking cigarettes. He read the local paper with little interest, only taking note of what movies were playing in case he wanted to catch one. What he really wanted to know was where the working girls hung out. There didn't seem to be an appropriate section for that info in the Des Moines Register, though. Back in his Pontiac, the Sioux City Strangler drove with the radio low, keeping one eye on the clock, getting to know the streets just a little bit. He usually liked to do that on his first night out of town, but he had time to kill before 3. The streets all looked the same, and even the poorer sections of town where you might usually see people walking or waiting on the bus looked empty. He did take note of a few bars that seemed like they might come to life later in the night. He circled the city, ending up back at the same Kentucky Fried Chicken where he started. He went in to use the bathroom, waving at the kid behind the counter. "Too many Cokes," he said when the kid in the paper hat gave him the side eye. The Sioux City Strangler parked his machine about a block away from Dr. Harry's office. Dr. Harry was actually Harrison Glendon of Rhode Island, but he had a carefully crafted down-home Midwest persona that made him popular with patients. At 4:17, the Sioux City Strangler walked out of the office, the back of his shirt damp with sweat. Dr. Harry's office was hot as hell because he insisted on using roaring chrome fans instead of springing for any sort of air conditioning. Part of his good old boy charm, thought the Sioux City Strangler as he dabbed the back of his neck with a tissue from the receptionist's desk. His last appointment was done, and he had to find a motel. He could have called ahead to one of the regular places the other salesmen used, but he never did that. This was new territory for him, and he wanted to get the lay of the land on his own. The Hollywood Hacienda, a bizarre-looking motel with a vaguely Spanish motif, looked fine from the outside, which is to say that it looked like a place where nobody would give a damn about what you got up to. The nightly rate was lower than usual, another promising sign that the proprietor had a tendency to look the other way. Before walking into the main office, the Sioux City Strangler checked his look in the rearview mirror. He ran his hands through his hair haphazardly, leaving one piece sticking up in the back and demolishing the even part on his left side. He took off his neatly tied tie and tossed it into the back seat. He lit a cigarette and smoked it down fast, almost to the filter, keeping the dying butt between his fingers. The man that walked into the Hollywood Hacienda must have looked like any other down-on-his-luck, smokes-him-to-the-filter salesman. Maybe a Bible salesman or a vacuum cleaner guy 10 years behind the times. At least that's the image the Sioux City Strangler was hoping to cultivate. The Sioux City Strangler took room 10 after a long, drawn-out conversation with the old man who was a little hard of hearing at the front desk. Room 10 was on the far side of the squat, low building and next to one of the 2 exit points. He pulled his Pontiac around and got the spot directly in front of the door. The room was tacky, colorful, and cheerful. It was also small and musty, like moisture had seeped into the walls and never left. The furniture was all mismatched, and the carpet had a big water stain under the tiny 2-person table jammed into the corner. It was approaching 5 p.m. now, and the Sioux City Strangler turned on the television just in time to catch a few commercials and the start of the evening news. The top story was the national price of oil, as it had been for nearly a year. The Sioux City Strangler yawned and lit a cigarette. Relaxing on the bed, shoes still on, he watched the newsman on the screen drone into the camera. A remote about a zoo opening featured funny animals and a harried reporter with a bad wig. His cigarette still smoking in the ashtray, the Sioux City Strangler fell into a shallow sleep that lasted 10 or 15 minutes until a Maalox commercial woke him up. With the TV still on, the Sioux City Strangler carefully hung up his clothes in the closet behind the dirty mirrored glass door. There were more stains on the closet floor, though these had a somewhat brownish tint to them. In the shower, there were obvious signs of mildew on the purple tile, but at least there were plenty of individually wrapped tiny bars of soap. He turned the handle left and felt the steam fill the small bathroom. He hadn't bothered to flip on the exhaust fan, and there was no window to be found. The Sioux City Strangler paced around his room, watching television shows and smoking cigarettes for the next hour after getting a Coke from the vending machine outside. He was irritated that it was so early and that the sun was still out. Just after 6, the Sioux City Strangler took off his white t-shirt and swapped it for a white button-down to go with the blue jeans he was already wearing. He slipped on a navy blue blazer, though it was too warm to wear for long. He finished his look with a pair of brown loafers matched with olive green socks. With his right hand on the brass door handle and another cigarette in his mouth, he suddenly remembered the black leather gloves he'd packed at the bottom of his suitcase. He slipped them into his breast pocket and smiled into the mirror, correcting his part and smoothing the out-of-place hairs on his head. He climbed into his Pontiac with no plan except to find a diner or bowling alley or bar with decent food to kill a few hours. The real fun wasn't going to start until the sun went down. Sioux City Strangler, the podcast, is a Past Due production and was recorded in sunny Los Angeles, California at Past Due Studios. This episode was written by Christopher Chase Godwin. Theme music was written and performed by Michael Wegner. Additional music by Michael Wegner and Christopher Chase Godwin. Storyblocks and Epidemic Sound also provided music for this episode. Dialogue editing services were provided by Janet Berry. Additional editing by Karl Weiss at Past Due Studios. Mixing by Tommy Singh. Audio mastering provided by Renee Rojas. Katrina Moan is the executive producer. Learn more of the Sioux City Strangler story by visiting SiouxCityStrangler.com today. Don't forget to follow Sioux City Strangler on Instagram for bonus content you won't find anywhere else. You can also shop Sioux City Strangler merchandise online to let everyone know you're a Strangler superfan. We've got posters, coffee mugs, and more available online now. This week we want to say thank you to our new sponsor, Feast Fresh Forever. Use promo code SCS2, that's the letters S, C, S, and the number 2, to get a $50 credit applied to your first order. We also have to thank our returning sponsor, Gas Saver Fuel Additives. Hit the open road without worry by putting Gas Saver Fuel Additives in your car or truck today. Subscribe to Sioux City Strangler, the podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms today to get new episodes as soon as they're available. We'll see you back here for the next episode.